This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
And welcome to the latest edition of Sundays with Dominic and Vito. I am your host, Vito Churko, alongside my co-host and my sidekick and partner in crime. That is me, Hermano, Dominic Churko. Dominic, how are you doing?
Vito, I'm doing well. Another crack at it here.
Another crack at it. Let's take another crack at it. And, you know, I think of baseball and bats when you say taking a crack at it, taking a swing at it. So let's get right in the swing of things and go into the World Series. Recap that a little bit here, Dom, and get your thoughts on our Houston Astros going down in 7 games, all games won on the road by both teams. The Nats win it in impressive fashion when they were 19-31 at one point through 50 games, tied with the Detroit Tigers. Same record as the Tigers through 50 games this season earlier in the year, Dom. And you think the Nats, too. Give us your theory. This is a really good thing I think we're going to get out of you this week on Sundays with Dominic and Vito. Your theory on why the Nats are the weakest team to ever win a World Series as well.
I mean, I said in my lifetime, first of all.
There we go. Let's clear it up in your lifetime. So how old are you, Dom? I really forget at times. How old are you?
23.
He's 23. Okay, go on now.
So if you look from 96 on, and the weakest teams that did win the World Series, a lot of people like to point to the Giants teams and the Royals team that won. Which the Royals, they had maybe the best lineup at the time, and then the Giants, they had probably as good of pitching in the years that they did win, along with a more rounded lineup at the bottom of the order. They didn't really, and people forget how good of years guys like Cody Ross had when they won the World Series the first time, and then Pablo Sandoval came out of nowhere. But they did have an MVP in Buster Posey. They did have guys like Brandon Belt. Their infield was the first World Series. They had veterans that were, you can say there's similarities between the two, but the one thing that separates the team is the bullpen. The bullpen was, they could go to their bullpen each year in the World Series titles that they did win and rely on them. The Nationals really, if they didn't have Strasburg or Scherzer, especially Strasburg, they would have lost. They would have lost in Game 6 for sure. He was their MVP. You could even argue in the playoffs how good he was against the Dodgers. If they didn't have Strasburg in either of those in the playoffs and on their team, they wouldn't be anywhere.
But they had Strasburg, a World Series MVP now, ERA under 2 in the postseason in his big league career. So can't take away anything from him and the Nats and what they've achieved, but you're saying weaker than even the Giants. Now, couldn't you argue, or at least bring up, hey, Anthony Rendon might become the National League Most Valuable Player of the Year award winner in 2019. They had him leading the way in the heart of their order. So they had a guy like that. They had the rotation, but I think the biggest difference maker is what you brought up already, which is the pen. The Nats' pen, very, very weak. Fernando Rodney and the only reliable guys, 2 of the reliable guys that I'll bring up right now, and you can bring up somebody else if you want to, are Sean Doolittle from that pen, and then Daniel Hudson. Daniel Hudson came out of nowhere to be good, right? He wasn't this back end of the pen kind of guy that could be used in high leverage situations prior to this year, perhaps, or really couldn't be used in those situations throughout the entirety of his career. He was a starting pitcher at first, suffered through injuries, and then became this guy that was reliable this season at the back end of games. But prior to this season, really, you couldn't say that about Daniel Hudson. So their bullpen, much weaker than the Giants' pen. That helped the Giants win 3 championships in 6 seasons, 2010, 2012, 2014. That's your biggest difference maker between the Nats and the Giants, correct?
Yeah, it is. But, even if you look at the lineup, they had guys like Angel Pagan that hit, 7th and 8th, 9th in their lineup. The guy hit still, he slugged close to 400. He had a 342 on base, and he hit 300 the year they won. Mike Morse hit 279 at the back, 336, 475 slugging. Hunter Pence hit toward the bottom of the order in that lineup. But, and Joe Panik hit 305 that year. The team was, as far as an all-around lineup, they could turn it over much easier. than this team. Because, I mean, the bottom of the order for the Nationals, they had to rely on guys. People forget how good Ryan Zimmerman was. Ryan Zimmerman during the regular season, he had 257, and he had a decent year, but he wasn't the year before as good as he was. He had 6 homers the whole year. So, and if you countless guys too on this team, Yan Gomes hit 223, Matt Adams hit 226. Victor Robles only hit 255, but he started later in the season. He got much better. He was down to 230 as well. And then they had, I think the difference was Anthony Rendon and Juan Soto in that lineup. But I mean, those guys were really good. The Giants, I guess you could argue, didn't have a guy that hit, didn't have the power numbers that they had. But still, the makeup of the lineup, I think the Giants had a better
makeup with their lineup at least. Now, the Nats, I know you believe yourself, Tom, aren't going to be as good. And you can pinpoint this, something I want to get into you with, and it's the free agents, top free agents going into the offseason. Number 2 and 3 from Sports Illustrated are Anthony Rendon and Steven Strasburg. And one of those two, if not both of those guys, will be leaving Washington in the offseason. I think Rendon is highly expected to leave town. I don't see any way, truly, that he resigns with the Nats. I know there was an offer earlier during the season, and they didn't come to an agreement on a contract long term. Now, Steven Strasburg, I could see landing back in Washington with the team that drafted him out of San Diego State when he became a phenom, came onto the scene, and has been good all throughout his major league career up to this point. Remember, he is 31, Rendon is 30. Rendon's key stats, a .319 batting average, 34 bombs in the regular season. For Strasburg, went 18-6, a 3.32 ERA, a guy that's never had an ERA of 4 or above in his major league career. So a great career so far with the Nats, but where does he end up this offseason, Dom? And also Anthony Rendon.
Yeah, I think Strasburg, the Nationals really have potentially third base covered with the addition of Carter Kieboom to their roster. So I feel like third base isn't as much of an important. It is important losing anytime you lose a guy like that, but I'm saying they have reinforcements within the organization, a young, talented Carter Kieboom that can come in and help. Where the pitching, they're going to try pretty much everything they can because they have guys like Patrick Corbin. They have guys like Nick Voth. The rest of their pitching isn't very good. They don't really have reinforcements at all. So, like I said, they had guys like, Austin Voth, Eric Fetty, Joe Ross. These guys aren't to the level of major league starting pitching going forward. They might be a good, 3 or 4 starters, but they're not, a number 2 or an ace for sure. And Scherzer's getting older as well, so you'd think maybe that if they're going to spend money here, that they would open the pocketbook. But I think the Corbin contract...
It limits them a little bit, too, on what they can do.
Bit.
Yeah.
Although I don't think, as much as that's even said, they pretty much could... They have enough money where they could... it's freed up anyway because they didn't sign a guy like in the previous offseason, what they did with Bryce Harper. But it's more of like a philosophy with them where they're not willing to pay the big bucks for whatever reason to certain guys. As far as re-signing guys when they hit the market, they're not willing to hold on to these guys, and that's probably going to be part of their downfall because they have the oldest team in baseball. The other teams in the NL East are up and coming. There's more to offer, more younger talent around baseball as well in the National League. Juan Soto, very talented, but I feel like they're going to do everything they can. I think they're going to do everything they can to re-sign Strasburg. But I think Anthony Rendon is surely going to go because they have a guy like Carter Kieboom that can slide in at third base. They have Trey Turner at shortstop. They have Wilmer Defoe, another infielder at second base that they can plug in there and maybe add a veteran, in that position. Maybe re-sign someone like Brian Dozier and go from there. But I think the pitching is going to be more of a priority.
The Nats don't have great rotation depth. To sum it all up, like you said, Dom, yourself, then guys that are good for them, were good for them this past season, are aging. And that is Max Scherzer, also Anibal Sanchez. Those dudes aren't getting any younger, so you would imagine they're not going to be as great moving forward. And if not next year, in 2021 and beyond. So the Nats, I think, have more of a dire need to re-sign Steven Strasburg. A guy, once again, they drafted, groomed to be their ace of the future, and he's become that for the Nationals. And the Nats obviously have other ace-caliber arms in Patrick Corbin and Max Scherzer, but I think, once again, like you said, Dom, yourself already, and so eloquently and well, that Steven Strasburg is more of the guy they need to re-sign this offseason, more than Anthony Rendon, at least.
Not to mention, they don't really have pitching prospects that are
coming up like a Carter Kieboom who can take the place of Rendon at third base, right?
Kind of, in their drafts, they've kind of tilted away toward more positional players. So, which begs the question regarding guys like, re-signing position players, which I don't think is as much of a priority. I thought last offseason, people look at it and say that was the smartest thing, not signing Bryce Harper. And in hindsight, it did look like it worked out. They won the World Series. But I think that their dedication to positional prospects and building around that organically, more so than pitching, shows you that they really could care less about the money, how much money they're going to throw, even though these guys have big contracts, and they did sign these guys for big contracts. But I think they're starting to move away from that because and build organically.
And now, Ben Reeder of Sports Illustrated, he's the guy that comes up with this list of the top free agents every single offseason, and this is his 12th annual Reader 50. So number one on the list is the Astros ace, Gerrit Cole, a guy that didn't want to talk about the World Series after Game 7 ended, wasn't used by A.J. Hinch. Was that a mistake not using him out of the pen in Game 7 down? Let's go with that first before I get your prediction on where Cole you think will end this offseason.
The biggest mistake that they made probably was not having Greinke finish that inning. I felt that the numbers against Kendrick, he had good success against Kendrick, especially in the postseason, the time that they faced off in the World Series. So therefore, I feel like they should have kept Greinke in to get through that inning and then go to Will Harris when they needed to. It was really one pitch he threw. He threw a changeup middle to Rendon. It was a mistake pitch. It's not like with Greinke, you don't have to worry about the stamina as much because he nibbles in the corners. He's a good location. That can negate pretty much everything. I didn't feel like he was getting too tired. I felt like he should have stayed in to get in that inning. And then you go to Will Harris to start an inning because he did work on short rest here too. But I felt like the lineup turnover, it didn't make sense to go with him there. And I don't think that pitch would have been thrown if there wasn't a guy in scoring position. Yeah, he threw a decent pitch, but he threw a pitch where he didn't really attack Howie Kendrick. He let him get his hands out, extend his hands, and the guy hits the ball. He sprays the ball. He's up the middle, right field approach to pretty much everything he does. He doesn't pull the ball as much.
Howie Kendrick.
I felt in the situation that pitch would never have been thrown. So I think it was a mistake for Hinch to have Greinke. I would think it was a mistake for Harris to go in at that time.
So should have left Greinke in. He should have stayed in that part of the game.
Yeah,
and then against Kendrick, Kendrick came up with so many big hits too, and really had good pitches thrown to him that he just hit.
Yeah,
he just hit some good pitches too, right?
That was a good pitch, but I feel like that pitch wouldn't have been as much as that is a good pitch.
Would not have been thrown by Greinke if Greinke was allowed to stay in, Dom? Is that what you're saying?
I think the situation. I think Greinke could have thrown him like a curveball to mess up the timing. First of all, he's a good fastball hitter. And second of all, for that situation, you're not going to really challenge him inside. So Will Harris throws a good cutter. And if he gets that cutter going inside, where, let's say, a guy on second base, he's not going to want a guy to hit the ball down the line. You're going to pitch a guy away with 2 outs, with that cutter. But I think, Howie Kendrick outthought him and knew he was going to get that pitch. As good of a pitch as it was, he throws cutters a lot. Cutters away. He's going to throw a cutter away with the guy on second base because he wants to make sure he's not pulling the ball or he belts a 2-run homer at that time with the guy on base. So he's going to be very cautious. I think Harris was too cautious there. And I feel like if Greinke was in there, he could have had him off balance, maybe not even thrown him a fastball at all in that count, or in that at bat. So I feel like that was a mistake to put Harris in at that point.
Gerrit Cole.
But
now,
I don't think it was a.
And now back to him being an impending free agent. And now he is widely heralded as a top free agent in all of the 2020 free agent class, right? I mean, we can easily say that going into the offseason. And Ben Reeder, has him at number 1 in his rankings as well. Now, this is a guy who I think we can agree upon, Dom, is going to win the American League Cy Young Award for the 2019 season. And, I mean, he has stellar numbers, and that's why he's going to win it. 20 wins, 2.50 ERA, was stellar, really good throughout the postseason as well. So this is a guy that deserves a lot of money and will definitely get paid handsomely this offseason and by a team other than the Houston Astros. So with all that being said, Dom, what is your prediction for where Cole ends up this offseason?
Well, there is, high speculation that there was talk with Cole and his teammates in the dugout in the clubhouse, hinting at he wanted to go back home. If you remember, he played at his college ball at UCLA, grew up in California. I think it's highly likely that he ends up with one of the LA teams, and I think even more so likely for a team like the Angels, who are in desperate need of a signature arm in that spot to complement a signature positional player in Mike Trout. And from what I've heard is that Gerrit Cole was more of an Angels fan growing up. It had the personal side to it as well. So with that in mind, I feel like he's going to end up with the Angels this offseason because they're going to have enough money to throw around there, and especially with the uncertainty of Shohei Ohtani coming back to 100% health with the surgery. I feel like being at 29 years old,
that's the thing.
Under 30 in the open
That's impressive.
market.
That's a key thing to bring up. I'm happy you brought that up.
You could give him arguably 9-10 years.
Give him a blank check as well and pay the man. And Artie Moreno in Anaheim probably will do so. And so that's the favorite for him right now.
Yeah, and the good thing about the 9-year and 10-year contract is that you end up paying less annually through an extension because a lot of these pitchers, they want certainty that, I'm going to be here for the years. Yeah, they'll take the money first, but if they can give him a lot of money with the years included, which Cole is going to get, it does benefit an organization, in fact, is saving extra dollars early on in the contract, especially when the team's early on in the contract. You get a 29-year-old Gerrit Cole in his prime, they can add elsewhere. So I feel like if the Angels do this, they can still even add more because, as we've seen with the contracts of last offseason with Manny Machado and Bryce Harper, these are a lot of backloaded contracts, and they have these guys in their prime. Bryce Harper's was very cheap this past year specifically. He outplayed his contract. Manny Machado did not pretty much made even on his contract. He didn't have as good of a year at third base for the Padres, but still, it still looks like a really good signing because of that. The way you can flesh out the contract and make the money work as far as making the team better. And I feel like now that's the way to go with having these big, not the years.
Backload the money in these contracts is a way of going, and the way
you can sacrifice
that Harper was signed with the Phillies, right? As you're saying.
You can sacrifice later on as far as like the dead money that you're going to get later on, even with someone like Pujols, which, it's a lot of money, but it's okay to do it because you didn't sacrifice the present for the future at the time of the signing as much, especially with the signing. The Pujols signing really was bad because he was so old when they did make the signing.
Too old to make that signing at that point in time. Yeah.
So that is bad in that sense. But I feel like these players make you so much money early on that it becomes a bargain early that, you're going to pay them a lot of money late, but you're still going to turn a profit later because you're going to maybe arguably win a World Series potentially. You're going to have other players to go around to complement the stars that you sign to these big contracts and have the money there. So I feel like in jersey sales as well. So I feel like this is actually a good thing going forward in baseball.
Dom Churko really getting into this point that he just elocuted to you guys because he's standing up. He is standing up while he's talking. He's that passionate about that take, about these contracts and how you can backload them. And you know what? It allows your team to win in the now, to win when you want to, which is the immediate future when you give out these big contracts to these dudes, such as Pujols, Harper, and whatnot. Pujols didn't work out because of his age.
But it doesn't, later on, like I'm saying, you end up, even if you're paying someone more, you're going to have a potential to sign players early on that, those guys might stay around later as they get older, for the smaller contract, the guys that make the smaller contracts, and you end up still having complements especially if these guys are still good into their late 30s. Of course, it's for sure a bargain.
Well, if they do end up being that good for that long. Now,
Right.
with Cole, under 30, key factor right there for a team that's willing to pay him long term. And I'm thinking the Angels, they're going to pretty much tell him, hey, whatever you want, baby, we're going to sign you. And because they have the ability and the willingness, and you need both, right, to sign these big name free agents that are going for the big money and want the long term contracts.
Right.
You need the ability and willingness as an organization. And the Angels want to win while Mike Trout's under contract.
Yeah,
and it's not looking good for them after this past season when they underachieved as well and had injuries aplenty to that starting rotation, including the tragic death of Tyler Skaggs.
Yeah, and another point too is, they have a young team to begin with. They're going to have a guy like Joe Adell playing right field for this team who excelled in the minor leagues. He's a top prospect in the organization, corner outfielder with power, looked good in the futures game as well. So they have a young team organically around them, like I'm telling you.
You're telling me, baby. I love it. You are giving it to me straight, baby. I love when you give it to me straight like this, Dom.
Like later on, it becomes really good because then Joe Adell will flourish later on at the twilight of those other contracts, and it'll end up being okay. I'm paying more for this guy, but I get Joe Adell in his prime, and I'm paying him, maybe arbitration eligible, like $5 or $6 million, then 12. It definitely will work.
Astute point. Love it from you, Dom. Now, to this, Rendon, where does he land?
Yeah, I feel like he's going to head back home as well. I think the Rangers, and coincidentally, they made a trade with the White Sox to pick up Wellington Castillo, and they did Wellington Castillo from the White Sox so far this offseason, and then they dumped him. I feel like they're doing everything they can to free up some money here. And that organization, Anthony Rendon has a history in Texas as well. Grew up in Texas and played for Rice University at third base. There's also a need there as well with the Rangers. Third base last year was, occupied by a guy like Asdrubal Cabrera, who was ended up being DFA'd later on, and the Nationals then picked him up. And Nick Solak, the guy that did play a little bit third base after the fact, he showed signs of, coming into his own at age 24, but I feel like there's definitely going to be room here, and there's definitely a need at the hot corner, especially since Beltre left. I mean, everything went down when that happened. Now, Asdrubal did have a good first half for the team, but it's time to move on, and Nick Solak, it doesn't look like to be the long-term answer there going forward. So I think Rendon is going to cash in there because they have, like I said, John Daniels and company, they have the money spent, and they have a lot of free agents, and they took a lot of risks last year, 1-year contracts to guys like Edison Volquez that didn't work out. Mike Minor had a really good year.
All-star campaign, right?
But you can't really count on that. So the money is definitely going to be there. They're going to open up the checkbook for Anthony Rendon this offseason.
Rendon leaves, and we think Strasburg stays with the Nats ultimately, correct? Just really quick with that one.
Yeah, although I also feel like a team like the Yankees.
Yankees are going to spend big on him because if they don't land Cole, which they probably won't based on everything that we've heard so far and what you've said so far on this podcast, Dom, they want Strasburg then. And they should get him. And if they get him, are they the clear-cut favorites maybe? I mean, they already made the ALCS this season.
Yeah, another thing, too, to remember is they had a guy like, they're going to lose guys like CC Sabathia.
Get that contract off the books, right, which he didn't do anything last year for them and was hurt then as well.
And Brett Gardner, if they choose not to resign.
And they might choose to resign him a career year at age what?
Right.
36? 37? I think
he's 36.
Maybe 37 or 37. He's going to be in 2020. Mm-hmm. Crazy how good he was this past year with the home run ball.
We'll see. Jacoby Ellsbury's another guy that'll be eventually coming out.
Unload that contract. My God, they would love to unload that contract.
That'll be unloaded eventually. Edwin Encarnacion. There's going to be money there as far as throwing it at the starting rotation, especially since guys like Domingo Germán, they're at the the young side. They don't have to worry about them as much, paying them yet. And the guys that they added, like Jay Happ, who'll be coming off the books after this year, there's a chance that they can make a long-term commitment, a very good chance, for a starting pitcher.
Yanks or Nats, and who's more likely then? Who's more likely between those two to land Strasburg?
I feel like the Yankees have salivated at the mouth for this because he was a number 1 overall pick. We know that Brian Cashman, he's as greedy as they get with guys like that, superstars. He's done it with guys like A-Rod. And if you end up in a bidding war with the Yankees, you're not going to win. Because Strasburg is so good, I'm going to have to go with the Yankees.
Yankees
Unfortunately,
for straws. Big straws, baby.
I will say this, the Nationals are going to give it everything they can. But I feel like Mike Rizzo has been shy. He's ended up gun-shy in contract negotiations with guys in the past, where they did have the money to maybe, we know this, to spend more money to combine players together, like Corbin and Harper last year, and they didn't do it. I feel like if they end up in a bidding war, Mike Rizzo will be no.
But Mike Rizzo, I think, and company keep their big fish in Strasburg after passing up on re-signing Harper. Harper chooses to leave for the rival Phillies. I think he keeps this guy in-house for the long term. And Strasburg is a national for life, and Washington looks terrific because of that. Moving on now to Ben Reeder's number 4 free agent this offseason, and that is Zack Wheeler, who pitched for the Mets, and 29 as well, just like Gerrit Cole. He went 11-8, 3.96 ERA in 2019, Dom. Where do you think he lands this offseason?
Yeah, I think what we saw last year, the Mets decided to hold on to him at the trading deadline, which was kind of shocking, and they added Marcus Stroman to begin with. I think they're going to do everything they can to keep him, primarily because, he's younger than a guy like Jacob deGrom, and he's they got Steven Matz, they got a guy like Walker Lockett, who will have a chance to stay there as well, or he will stay there, but they're gonna try to re-sign him. I don't think they re-sign him. I feel like he'll want more money than what's offered out there. That's what the Mets offer him, and I feel like the Nationals are actually a good spot for Zack Wheeler, and the chance that Strasburg's
leaves town. So interesting concept there to take into account. So Wheeler maybe ends up with the Nats. New manager now with the Metropolitans too, and the former Met Carlos Beltran, a guy that's never coached before. So interesting hire there by the Mets. Anyways, maybe they will keep
I will
Zack
say
Wheeler
this too,
still, too.
The fact that he was an impending free agent and they held on to him.
So they're trading him maybe means they want him for the future.
Value him because of his age. He's younger than the guys that at the top of the rotation, as well. So there is potential there with Zack Wheeler. He was arguably their best pitcher, from June to August. So we'll see.
We will see, Dom. Indeed. Now, number 5 on the SI Top 50 Major League Baseball free agents list is a closer of the Yanks, Aroldis Chapman. Where does he end up this offseason?
Yeah, I think a team that's on the rise here in the National League, and we've been talking about them before, what they did last offseason, they looked like the best team, maybe the best team in the National League on paper. Injuries and whatnot turned them away. Teams, rose up ahead of them. I think the Phillies are a really good shot and I would pick them to sign them because, they have Tommy Hunter gone potentially. Pat Neshek, free agents that they signed last offseason. David Robertson's there, but they need maybe another left-handed relief pitcher. They got Hector Neris and Sir Anthony Dominguez, who had really good years last year, but they're from the right side, and I think they could use a left-handed arm. And as good as Aroldis Chapman is, they don't really have a left-handed arm, and they were going with Adam Morgan, out of their bullpen a lot of the times. I feel like he's the left-handed arm that they're missing in that rotation. I feel like the Phillies are the team that will have a really good shot in signing him.
And Phillies probably will still be very willing to spend this offseason because they got a new manager now, and their intent is to win now. There's no doubt about that in Philadelphia. And they saw the Nats win. So I think that could enhance the odds of the Phillies spending money as well.
That they don't really have, like I said, a left-handed arm at that caliber, and it would definitely catapult them as far as playing matchups and whatnot. So they're definitely looking at a left-handed reliever, and I feel like for the Phillies, why not the big fish, the big left-handed fish in the market?
So I want to know second of this. Very good stuff, Tom. Maybe we'll talk more about this on an edition of Tigers Talk moving forward as well. But you nailed it. Top 5 free agents according to Ben Reeder of Sports Illustrated, and Dom gave us his predictions on where those 5 big cats will end up this offseason. Now to seg into this, because we are in the middle of the NFL and Lions season, we have this guy, and he is the football history dude, and he's on Twitter at FHDude, and does a podcast, and it's a Football History Dude, the name of it. It's a show that takes the listener on a journey back in time to learn about the rich history of the NFL, celebrating its 100th season. So an interesting little soundbite here from him, and not too long of a clip that he produced, and we're going to air it now on this edition of Sundays with Dominic and Vito. Should be very interesting to listen to, and once again, from the Football History Dude, can be found on Twitter at FHDude. So give the guy a follow, well worth your time. And here is that soundbite now from him, and enjoy.
November 26, 1970 was the first time that the Oakland Raiders and Detroit Lions would square off against each other in what would become a historic season for the NFL. The score was nothing out of the ordinary, with a 28-14 victory for the Detroit Lions in Tiger Stadium. However, this game does go down in NFL history as the first time that an original AFL team would play against an NFL team on Thanksgiving Day. This is because the 1970 season was the first year that the AFL was fully merged into the NFL, playing a common schedule for the first time. And because this was the first fully integrated season between the AFL and NFL, there was this new fancy playoff format on the horizon. The wild card system was here, baby. The Detroit Lions that year, yeah, they finished strong, winning their last 5 games of the year to close out with a 10-4 record. Minnesota won the Central Division with a 12-2 record, but there was still hope for these Detroit Lions. Because in 1970, the wild card format was there. The Lions would become the first ever NFC wildcard team, and they would play Dallas, also with a 10-4 record, in the divisional round. But wait a second. Shouldn't the 12-2 team play the wildcard team instead of the 10-4 team? Well, from 1970 to 1989, the league had this rule where 2 teams could not play each other in the playoffs, at least until the conference championship game if they were in the same division. So they packed their bags, and Detroit headed off to Dallas to play in the divisional game, the first NFC wildcard team of all time. Unfortunately, the game ended in a 5-0 bitter defeat against the Cowboys. No offense to speak of. And the 1970 season was over for the Lions. However, they will always be able to hang their hat, or their helmet that is, on becoming the first ever NFC wildcard team. Now, if you want to hear more about this and the 100 years about the NFL, you can head over to thefootballhistorydude.com to check out the podcast. But for now, dudes, I'm through if you're through.
And that was a clip, once again, about the Detroit Lions from the Football History Dude. He's on Twitter at FHDude. Make sure you give him a follow because it's well worth your time to do so. Now moving on to this, the last topic on this week's episode. Episode number 6 we've made it to of Sundays with Dominic and Vito. And I want to get your thoughts, Dom, real quick. On the Golden State Warriors potentially tanking the rest of the way this season because of the injury, the hand injury to Steph Curry that will keep him out for at least 3 months. Then they're going to reevaluate it at the end of the 3 months. And I think something just happened to Draymond Green as well, right? Something flared up with him. Klay Thompson is out more than likely for the entire season. All of these guys being out, it kind of sets up maybe the possibility of tanking. And is that the right move then for the Warriors to make this season, Dom?
Yeah, tanking as far as, we know that they're going to have a lot of money, this offseason. They did re-sign Klay Thompson, but they're still going to have a lot of money. And there's a guy in the draft who's maybe worth it in James Wiseman. He's 7 foot tall. He's big. He needs maybe to, gain more weight. But he's good in the paint on both sides of the ball, plays defense, can block shots. If he develops a jumper, I don't see why he can't be, maybe like an Anthony Davis light, someone like is that good. And, the Warriors could use some front court help. And they, even during their title runs, they got away with not having a really good, big. You could argue that, Kevin Durant was like their big, especially, in those years. But I feel like for James Wiseman, it might be worth it to tank here going forward. And then they can see what they have with guys that currently on the roster, like a guy like Jordan Poole, Eric Pascal, Marquise Chris, guys like that, to see what they're made of and see if they can be a part of their future as well. I think it's a good testing.
Test the waters for tanking for the Warriors. It's well worth
Testing
it
pool.
right now for them. How about a Sunday sound off from you regarding tanking? What are your thoughts on tanking overall wise, typically, when it comes to an NBA team? And let's just focus on the NBA, because if we did it with the multiple sports, right, it could go on and on this conversation. So just focusing specifically on the NBA and tanking in the NBA, Dom. Your thoughts on that? Your Sunday sound off, let's say, for this week's episode of Sundays with Dominic and Vito.
Yeah, I think teams need to have good foresight. I think each team is different, so to each their own organization. I think if you look at teams that have done this in the past, like the Cleveland Cavaliers, yeah, they did get lucky with Kyrie Irving, but they had the worst year, in franchise history before, and they weren't, attract. They're never going to attract the big name free agents. So for them, it doesn't make too much sense to do that. Every year in and year out. I mean, yeah, you can get better, and they did get better with guys like Kyrie Irving and Deion Waiters, who eventually LeBron wanted him out. But
and LBJ got his way. King James is going to get his way. He is
right.
King
and it
James.
Didn't work out.
For a
They
reason,
didn't win
right?
the title. They brought the title back, and you can argue too, if they didn't have Kyrie, well, what would have happened, right? So it can, the draft picks can work out, but we've seen teams that they kind of are in these, are we going to push it, going forward and add big names like the Sacramento Kings, who they have a really good young nucleus, but they've had trouble getting guys to go there. And really have them, have a superstar to build around. And the Brooklyn Nets, up until now, it helps that Kyrie Irving is, grew up in, New Jersey and whatnot. So the Nets really had a tough time getting guys to go there as well, up until now. So I feel like if I'm a team like, Phoenix Suns that has, maybe even a budding superstar in Devin Booker, I don't think the need's as pressing to tank for every team. And I feel like the Phoenix Suns, they're getting better without tanking as much. And they did tank a little bit, obviously, Ayton and whatnot. But Ayton's not even a part of the team. He's hurt to start the year. So I feel like it depends on the team, and you got to have foresight, and you got to have a good young nucleus to where it, an experienced nucleus nonetheless, like the Warriors. I mean, it's a perfect team to do it.
Makes sense. So the crux of the issue, one of the big keys if you're going to tank, is whether or not you can recruit free agents then as well, right, moving forward.
Right.
You want to build a team with young guys and grow organically.
So now it does look like the Phoenix Suns, they might have some, with their management gone after, letting go of the homophobic, the homophobia surrounding ownership and whatnot. It looks like maybe a more inclusive place to go to going forward. I know that city is, there's not a lot of, as far as, excitement, with professional organizations right now. Cardinals have a rough history. And the Suns, getting, the Steve Nash years never could get over that.
That's the best era of their franchise history, and they haven't even made a finals.
They want more.
Or they made a finals way back, remember, too, but with the Nash teams,
and I feel like, taxpayers aren't really getting,
the best bang for their buck. Their pro
teams.
sports franchises, right?
Spending a lot on, a new stadium, a new basketball arena. It doesn't look good, but I feel like that team is starting to, build around. They beat the Warriors
and blew them out the other night, right?
Devin Booker looks really good. They have, like I said, they have a good young core there now where they can potentially build around going forward. And, with the head coaching carousel they had there.
Earl Watson was even the head coach at one point. So many different dudes have been the coach. Lindsey Hunter was the interim guy at one point, too.
So if you're talking about a team that had some rough years in tanking, was it worth doing it? Maybe not. But now you got, like I said, you have a guy like Devin Booker, so where finally things are starting to get better. I don't think it's a recipe for success for every team.
It's not fail-proof. So think it through before you commit to tanking. Right. And Dom, wise words I'll leave the audience with from you on this edition of Sundays with Dominic and Vito. Always a pleasure speaking with you. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday here, man. And I'll talk to you again next week. How about that?
All right, sounds good, Vito. Look forward to be back on the show.
Adios.